Hello and welcome to today's lecture, where we shall continue our study of perturbation methods and its applications in transport phenomena. So today we shall take up the very interesting and relevant example of pulsatile flow in a pipe. In a pipe, a cylindrical pipe. Right, so let's start with a schematic. Yes, so I basically have a pipe. This is the center line, and the radius of the pipe, let's say, is R, capital R. Yes, yes, the idea of it being pulsatile is that the pressure gradient that's driving the flow is going to be oscillatory. So minus dP over dz, let's say dP over dx. So this is the x direction, or sorry, I'm using cylindrical coordinates, so let me revert back to z. Yes, so this is the r direction, this is the z direction, and we're going to assume axisymmetry for the flow. So we are not concerned, things in the theta direction are uniform or non-varying in theta. So minus dP dz, the axial pressure gradient that drives the flow, is something of the following form, right? Which is, it has a constant part, which is just g, and then an oscillatory part of amplitude, relative amplitude a, so that the oscillatory part is Ga sine omega t, where omega is the frequency, such that the pressure gradient oscillates over a time period 2 pi over omega. So this is the problem setup that we have, and what we want to understand is how the unidirectional flow responds if you have an imposed oscillation on top of the base pressure gradient. So if A is 0, so that we have, alternatively if omega is 0, so if we have no oscillatory component, then we will simply have steady Poiseuille flow through a pipe, which, as you know, has a parabolic form in the radial coordinate. This is the problem that, one of the first problems that we solve in fluid mechanics. So today we are going to look at how we can understand the physics of the problem when we have an oscillatory component added to the driving pressure gradient. And to do this, we shall use perturbation methods and thereby look at different limits of the forcing frequency, slow frequencies, where the fluid is able to respond to the fluid and remain almost quasi-static, and large frequencies where one might think that there would be almost no additional flow. However, the features of the flow are significantly modified by the presence of the pulsations. Such a problem, of course, is highly relevant to the flow of blood in human capillaries. In fact, that was one of the motivations to study this problem originally. And of course, there are many features of this problem that aren't here, the most obvious being the fact that the walls of our capillaries are extensible and are flexible or deformable. But even to incorporate that, it's important to have an idea of what are the kinds of oscillatory stresses that the fluid exerts on the walls before we can think about incorporating the fact that the walls respond to such stresses. And so this problem is like a first step to understand how the nature of pressure-driven flow changes if you have a pulsatile pressure gradient, or if it's driven by an oscillatory pump, like the heart. Okay, so with those preliminaries out of the way, let us begin by writing down the governing equations, but in the simplified form for unidirectional flow in the z direction. So if u is the velocity component in the z direction, the only surviving velocity component, then I know that the equation of continuity will simply tell me that du by dz equals 0, which means the velocity doesn't vary in the z direction, and therefore the pressure gradient complies with that by also not being a function of the z direction. So, however, the flow is certainly going to be unsteady since the pressure gradient is varying in time. So I have to retain the inertial term. So let's write out the equations now. Again, remember u is the velocity in the z direction. Now I don't have u dou by dou z because dou by dou z is 0 from the continuity equation. is equal to my pressure gradient, right, using the form I have given, plus my viscous term. Remember that we are now in cylindrical coordinates, so that we can describe the flow in this circular pipe. So this is the viscous term that survives, since we are considering variations only in r and none in theta or z. Okay, before I proceed, let me append stars on top of these dimensional velocities, times and radial coordinate, so that later when immediately when I'm going to scale the problem, I can use non-starred variables for the non-dimensional variables. Okay, so this must be complemented with boundary conditions. So we of course have the no-slip boundary condition equal to capital R. So at the pipe, at the wall of the pipe, I have the velocity going to 0, and at the center, of course, u star is bounded at the center line. Okay, so another thing we need to think about is what about my initial condition or a condition on time. So today what we're going to focus on is the long-term behavior of the system. So let's say you start up the flow from the velocity when the velocity is 0 and the fluid is still. After a while, which we can estimate from scaling as we had done in earlier classes, the system will reach some kind of asymptotic state, which in this case, because the driving pressure gradient that keeps the flow unsteady is oscillatory and periodic, we expect the flow response to also be periodic. It need not be in phase, but we do expect it to have the same time period, especially given that the problem is entirely linear in the velocity. And so what we are going to search for is the long-time behavior when the solution is going to be periodic and satisfy the fact that u at t star must be u at t star plus 2 pi over omega. This basically says we are looking for a time periodic solution, which remember will appear at long times. If you want the early time solution, then we need to solve the same problem with some specified initial condition. But whatever the initial condition, we expect the flow to ultimately relax to a periodic state. And that problem can be solved also, in this case analytically, because the entire governing equation is linear. But it will ultimately lead to the periodic solution. So today we will just focus on the long-term periodic state of the flow. Okay, so this is the setup of our problem. Let us now do the first thing that we have learned, to do when we want to approach a transport problem, which is to scale the problem so that we get a better idea of what we're dealing with. Now again, we have done several scaling exercises on similar problems, so we will just I won't spend too much time here, but just take you through the scaling and then proceed with the more interesting parts of this example. Okay, so a natural scale for the length in the r direction is going to be the radius of the pipe, which we can start off with, right, assuming that we're interested in variations of the velocity field across the entire pipe width. I then have to choose a velocity scale. So as you would know now, if I take so if I choose the scale for the radial coordinate direction to be r, I'm going to get mu by r square here, and then if the u characteristic that comes out from here will come out in the numerator. The choice to find uc then depends on whether I balance this term with the pressure gradient or whether I balance the pressure gradient and the inertial term, right? Because here too I will get a uc over the characteristic time t ski yet to be determined. So for the moment, let us balance the viscous term with the pressure gradient, implicitly saying that the problem is dominated by viscous stresses and pressure gradient stresses, and the inertial effects Arunia modification. But we can, of course, as you know, rescale the problem when we're looking at different limits. So to start with, we'll get UC by balancing these two terms, which means mu UC upon R square must balance with G. So that by setting that combination to 1, I'm going to get UC equal to G R square over mu, the typical scale for pressure-driven laminar Poiseuille flow. And now with this velocity scale, you can choose a time scale by setting the coefficient of this term, the inertial term, to 1. Right? That would give us a time scale which would be R square over nu, which is the viscous time of the fluid, or the time it takes for momentum to diffuse through the fluid due to viscous effects. This is, of course, one possible time scale. Our problem clearly has another time scale that comes from the forcing frequency, that is 1 over omega. So since we have two time scales, we should expect the ratio of time scales to show up as a non-dimensional parameter. Now if I had chosen the time scale as 1 over omega, we would get a non-dimensional number in front of the inertial term, which might allow us to make statements about how important that term is relative to others. But for now, since I'm really interested in resolving the time dynamics of the problem, and I don't want to take the limit of quasi-static behavior a priori, so I will set the coefficient of the unsteady term to 1 and choose my time scale accordingly, which means I'm choosing the viscous time scale here. And therefore, when I now substitute these scale variables into the problem, I'm going to get a non-dimensional group inside the forcing term sine t. So let's see how that proceeds. Oh yes, another useful step at this stage right away is to recognize that I can decompose this pressure gradient into, of course, its constant part and its oscillatory part. And since the problem is linear, I can write U star as a steady part which is driven only by G, and the oscillatory component which is driven by Ga sine omega t. And then I can write the scale version of that as well. So basically what I'm saying is I can write U star as U characteristic times a non-dimensional velocity, but that non-dimensional solution for the velocity can be decomposed into a steady state component driven by purely G plus A times the oscillatory component. Right, so USS and U oscillatory UO are both non-dimensional with the characteristic scale UC, and I've taken out the amplitude of the pressure gradient explicitly here. So U naught is going to be driven only by sine omega t, whereas USS will satisfy the same equation but with the pressure gradient of 1, because I will be dealing with the scale problem. Okay, so let me I'll leave it to you to write out the equation for USS. It will turn out to be just standard Huygens-Poiseuille flow. And now directly go to the equation for U naught, which is going to be non-dimensional. Sorry, so the equation for, just for convenience, I'm going to suppress this U naught here. Right, so the meaning should be clear, but I don't want to carry this subscript naught all over the place. So let's just erase that out. Okay, so U here now stands for the oscillatory part. That's purely for algebraic convenience, because this is going to be quite a long example and involves a considerable bit of algebra, and it will be helpful not to carry over unnecessary subscripts. Okay, so this is the equation for the oscillatory part of the solution, the non-dimensional oscillatory part, which goes as du dt, right, equals, remember I said it's just driven by sine, now omega t, the non-dimensional t into tc, right? So I'll get a ratio of time scales here, which should go as omega r square over nu, right? Because the characteristic time scale is tc, and I'll call that group rw. And then I have the viscous terms. right, where Rw is equal to omega times r square over nu, which is basically the viscous time scale upon the time scale of the oscillations, where time scale of oscillations is 1 by omega, right, and this is the viscous time scale. Note that I have lost the stars because basically I'm saying r star is non-dimensional r times the characteristic length, and the same for the velocity and the time. Okay, so this is my non-dimensional equation for the oscillatory part, and it's complemented by boundary conditions of no slip at the wall and boundedness at the center line. Very nice. So this is now really the problem that we want to deal with today, right? It's flow, unsteady flow in a pipe where you have a purely oscillatory pressure gradient sine r omega t, where r omega is a non-dimensional term that represents the magnitude of the frequency really. It takes the form of a ratio of time scales. So if you have small frequencies, it means essentially that the time scale of the viscous time scale is small compared to the time period of the oscillation, or the fluid has very long time to relax while the pressure gradient is varying. So that is really, it seems to be the limit of quasi-steady behavior, right? And you can almost see that that would appear from here. But as we go along and we use perturbation expansions, we will see it emerging automatically in various limits. Alright, so before we approach this problem, it's helpful to try and get a feel for what would be the behavior of the solution in different limits. But this form of the equation is not particularly amenable to that, because if we want to consider, let's say, the limit of small rw, we really want this non-dimensional group to be multiplying the terms in our equation as a coefficient, so that we can say whether a certain term is small or large. Right now it's trapped within the sign, which is always bounded from 0 to 1, so that's not very helpful. And physically also this has resulted because we've said already that a time scale of interest is the flow time scale. Rather, if we set the characteristic time to be the oscillatory time scale, we can then approach different limits by saying whether the time scale of the flow is small or large relative to the oscillatory time. So to do that, we basically do a simple transformation here. We take a new time variable, non-dimensional time variable, to be the old non-dimensional time times r omega. Yes, r omega. This is equivalent to rescaling time with the oscillatory time scale. How can we see this? Well, let's say I want to really define this t bar to be the original dimensional time divided by the oscillatory time. Yes, so oscillatory time is a time scale. But then this can be related to my current non-dimensional time, which is t over t viscous, in the following manner. Right, which is basically, so this is the current t, and t viscous by t oscillatory is simply, as you know here, r omega. So you see the transformation I'm doing, which mathematically you can see if I do this transformation, I'll get sine t bar here and rw will pop out of the unsteady term. But physically, in terms of scaling, you can see it makes sense, because I'm basically now rescaling the problem, saying the characteristic time is the oscillatory time scale, so that I can look at the problem in different limits. Okay, so for the moment, let's look at the rescaled equation, which will be dou u by dou t bar times r omega, because t is t bar over r omega. So if I substitute that here, I get r omega in the numerator. This must be sine of t bar, and this term remains the same. Now you see that if I take the limit of Rw being very small, right, which is the low frequency limit, I basically get that u goes as some function over r, which will be obtained once I solve the equation that survives, right? Basically, if I set this to 0, the left hand side to 0, I'll have an equation that I can solve pretty easily. But it's clear that u will be some radial variation and it will go as sine t bar. So it seems that the velocity will be in phase with the driving frequency in the limit of r omega being small. So this, along with just basically the form of the equation, seems to suggest that we could guess a solution in general to be u is equal to some function of r times sine t, substitute it in here and then just solve an equation for that function of r after factoring out the time dependence. Right? But before we do that, we should make sure that this thing holds, this type of solution holds for all omega. Right? Otherwise, we would only be solving the problem in one limit. So what happens now if we take r omega to be large in this equation? Right? So let's now look at that limit. But in order to do that, you see now that I would have, well, I could just divide throughout by this equation first, right? Since r omega is large, remember you can only make statements of scaling meaningful if you look at terms vanishing to 0, not blowing off to infinity. So to help with that, I'll first divide throughout by r omega. Okay. Here you see now that I get basically a sort of absurd result, right? That if r omega is very large, basically these terms are going to cancel out. Right? These are both going to tend to 0, and I'll get dou u by dou t bar basically goes as 0, which means u is something steady. But that clearly cannot be true, right? Because the problem is being driven by what I'm saying is a high frequency, and I want to resolve what that time dynamic is. So this is pretty much useless result. And the reason we have attained this result is because we are basically violating the original idea of our scaling of the velocity, right? Because we had scaled the velocity, balancing the pressure gradient with the driving oscillations. However, in the high frequency limit, we really need to balance as the governing balance. We should balance the inertial term with the pressure gradient, which means I should rescale my velocity field just as I had rescaled my time variable in the previous step. Right? So this is, I would say, a wrong scaling. Right? Or we have violated our original scaling. So this scaling really doesn't work in this limit. Instead, what we need to do is we need to rescale u star by balancing inertia and the pressure gradient. Because it makes sense that if you start driving the fluid with a high frequency, even if its viscosity is significant, ultimately inertia should become a more dominant effect than viscous forces. So in order to do that, we can do what we had done just in the time scale, right? We say a new u bar is equal to the old u times r omega. Right? This is in fact, remember, really equivalent to saying that I want u star to now be scaled by a new velocity, which will actually come out of the balance of the inertial terms with the pressure gradient. And you can actually show that that new velocity is simply g by rho omega. You could check this by going back to the equation, substituting in uc, and then rather than balancing a pressure gradient with the viscous term, you balance the pressure gradient with the inertial term, keeping in mind that the time scale now is 1 over omega, right? So you will get this velocity scale. But this, to relate this to our old problem, we can do it as follows. Yes, this is I want this to be u bar, but this can of course be written as u star over my old viscous velocity scale. Right, this is the old u times g r square by mu times my new scale. So this is the old u which I have here, and this stuff you will see is just r omega. Because I cancel g, and you will this is nu by rho is basically nu, and so you will get r square omega over nu, which is r omega. Okay, so by making this substitution, it's effectively rescaling, going back and rescaling the problem by balancing inertia with the pressure gradient, which is appropriate for the large RW limit. And if we do that now, we can do it quickly here in this fashion, noting u is u bar by r omega. You'll see the r omega leaves the inertial term, which is appropriate now because the inertial term is a dominant term in the physics of this limit of the problem. I'll get sine t bar, right, because nothing changes here. So you can already see that this makes sense now because these two terms are going to be retained no matter what in the limit of large RW. Right, and from the viscous term, u goes as u bar by r omega, so we'll get 1 by r omega times the viscous term. Now do u bar by u r. Yes, so this is now the large frequency scaled equation. So now we see that if Rw is much greater than 1, we actually get dou u bar by dou t bar goes as sine t bar, which implies that u bar must go as some function a different function of r. Let's not use prime because that denotes derivative, right? Some other function of r different from what I had in the case of the quasi-static behavior, right? Some different function of r, but this time cos t bar, right? Because it's the derivative of u sine t, so the solution should be cosine t. So you can see now that in the high frequency limit I am out of phase with the driving pressure gradient in contrast to the behavior in the low frequency limit. Right, so this tells me now that the response of the flow velocity really depends on Rw. If Rw is small, then the fluid response is going to be in phase. If Rw is very large, then the inertial terms balance the pressure gradient and the response is going to be out of phase. And that makes sense physically because inertia represents the lag in the fluid, so to speak, and is the cause for it not being able to exactly follow the driving frequency. Whereas if the frequency is sufficiently slow, the inertia of the fluid is unimportant and the viscous forces ensure that you exactly follow the driving pressure gradient and so you stay in phase. So for a general Rw which is not incredibly small or not incredibly large, I expect some kind of behavior in between the two. That is, I'll have a response that is a combination of in phase and out of phase behavior. Okay, so you can see now that this simple scaling analysis, both the original scaling and then various rescalings, have sort of revealed an interesting aspect of the problem from a physical perspective. So we already know what to expect, in the different, depending on what the driving frequency is relative to the viscous time scale in the problem, which basically involves the viscosity as well as the dimension of the pipe, right? So a very small pipe like a microfluidic channel you expect to be in phase, but a larger pipe you expect a significant out of phase response. But more than just that, we also have now something useful to take away as far as the mathematical solution of the problem is concerned. Because we now know that we cannot postulate a possible solution to this general equation as just some function of r times sine Rwt. Because in general there could be a cosine contribution as well. Alright, so then how does one approach such a mixed time response problem? Well, the standard trick is to now look at a companion problem where we replace the sine Rw forcing with exponential of IRWt. So let's now look at a companion problem that will help us solve the problem of interest. Okay, so for the companion problem is for a variable that I will call u hat. Let me create some more real estate here. Yes. So I have dou u hat by dou t is I'm now going to write it as e to the power I rwt. So I've replaced sine rwt as e to the power I rwt here. Okay, and the motivation for this comes from Euler's identity, one of the most profound and beautiful formulas in mathematics. So you see that the exponential contains in it both the cosine and the sine responses, right? So by moving into the complex variable space, we can account for both types of responses in a single problem. And moreover, because our forcing just involves sine, we can say that the solution of interest u is simply the imaginary part of the solution u hat. Right? This follows because the equation is linear. If the equation is non-linear, this wouldn't work. But because the equation is linear, u hat really has two parts. One part that responds to cosine, one part that responds to sine. So if I solve for u hat, I know that the imaginary part of u hat is really the response to sine, whereas the real part would have been the response to the cosine. So why consider this companion problem? The reason is that in this form, it's much easier to solve the problem because I now can write a possible solution. So I'm going to now seek for a solution that has a separable form where u for u hat, that is, can be written as some function of r, right, times e to the power I r omega t. So the kind of separation that I wanted is possible when I go to this companion problem in the complex variable space, which I could not do in the original problem because I knew that there could be a cosine response in u. So this allows me to factor out the time dependence from the problem. So let's go ahead and do that now for the companion problem, remembering all the while that ultimately I want to take only the imaginary part of u hat. So therefore, if I substitute this into the companion problem, I get I want an equation now for h of r. So ddt acting on this is just going to throw out h of r here and give me a factor of I r w is equal to, this is simply 1 dou h by dou r. So what I've done is substituted in here. You will see every term will pop the factor e to the power I r w t h of r back out, right? And by cancelling off the e to the power I r omega t throughout, I get the following equation. So this is now my new basically governing equation to the problem. Let me rewrite it in a form that some of you all may recognize. So I take this to the other side and I take the one to the other side. Okay, so this is my equation, and now of course I need to write boundary conditions. So I know that h at r equal to 1 is equal to 0, whereas h must be bounded at r going to 0. Okay, so this is my equation for h. Okay, as I proceed now, let me just number some of these equations, right? So the original problem, we've decomposed that and arrived here. So let's call this 1. Right, this was the problem in u. I then came back to the same problem. This was just some scaling analysis, but ultimately I want to solve the problem in the form of equation 1. To do that, I recognized after my scaling analysis that I should look at the companion problem, which I'm going to call now equation 2. Right, and that companion problem, after taking the separable form of solution, gives me an equation for the radial part, which I'm going to call 3. Okay, that will make things convenient as we go along.